For many urbanites, their vision of livable, walkable cities draws directly on the work of author and activist Jane Jacobs. But a decade after her passing, and in an era of seemingly unstoppable change, some have begun to wonder whether her ideas of urbanism are rooted in the past and thus possibly are now passé. Let's get into this. In Callicoon, New York, via Skype, we welcome Peter Moskowitz. He is the author of the forthcoming How to Kill a City: Gentrification, Inequality, and the Fight for the Neighborhood. And here in our studios in Toronto, Jennifer Keesmaat, the Chief Planner for the City of Toronto, and Nathan Storing, who is the co-editor of Vital Little Plans, the short works of Jane Jacobs. Peter, good to welcome you in one of the few blue states left in America, and nice to have you two here with us here in our Toronto studios. I want to start, Nathan, just a few minutes with you off the top here on Jane Jacobs, because I don't want to assume that everybody has heard of her, even though, I mean, she's obviously legendary in some parts. But let's just start. For those who don't know, who was she?
Sure. So Jane Jacobs was a Canadian-American writer and urbanist and activist, most famous for her 1961 book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And she basically spent her entire career trying to understand how cities work from a physical, a social, and an economic sort of point of view.
She was from there and then came up here. What turned her into an activist?
Sure. So she moved to New York in the 1930s and spent a lot of time getting to know the city and getting involved in Greenwich Village. And what turned her into an activist was the city's attempts to try and change the neighborhood, both first through a road through Washington Square Park, which is a very beloved park in Greenwich Village, and then through an urban development scheme, an urban renewal scheme, rather, in her neighborhood, directly where she lived, actually.
Robert Moses was her nemesis. Who was he?
Right. So Robert Moses was known as sort of the master builder of New York. He held a large number of different positions on boards and in agencies in the city, and was known for his urban renewal schemes, including both creating luxury and public housing, and then also highways. That's really his big claim to fame.
Yeah. She eventually left New York, came to Toronto. How come?
Well, during the Vietnam War, she was involved with some of the protests, and both of her sons agreed that they would rather serve time in jail than serve in the army during that time. And so the family made a collective decision to move to Toronto to escape the draft.
And one of the big fights that she had when she was here, again, for people who've been in the capital for a long time, they will remember this. For those who don't, it may mean nothing. The Spadina Expressway. What was that all about?
That's right. So, you know, she had just left New York, and there she had fought against an expressway called the Lower Manhattan Expressway, which would have cut across, you know, some of what is now some of the most valuable real estate in the country, which is kind of wild. And when she sat down in Toronto, her first apartment in the city was on Spadina, and she immediately found out that another expressway was actually going to go right through her house. And so she joined the fight to put arrest to the Spadina Expressway and succeeded.
She succeeded because who canceled it?
Bill Davis, Premier
Correct.
Bill Davis.
That was just a cheap plug for my book. That's all. Here we go. I'm going to do a little cheap plug for your book now. This is an excerpt from Vital Little Plans. Jacobs and her colleagues also saw that the American cities in the post-war era faced grave problems. People were fleeing to the suburbs. Factories and offices followed hard on their heels, and swaths of so-called slums and blight spread in neighborhoods left behind near downtown. Forum's editors believed in cities, so when the federal government authorized subsidies for public housing programs and privately backed urban renewal projects, the magazine applauded. How did all of that lead Jane to write her seminal book 55 years ago that you referenced, The Death and Life of Great American Cities?
Sure. So that moment that you took out, she was working for a magazine called Architectural Forum, which is a very well-known architecture magazine in the States. And as that says, I mean, she and all the people she worked with really believed in urban renewal originally, because they were fighting against the urge to kind of flee to the suburbs and believed in trying to save the city somehow. But then as she started actually reviewing some of these places and got the chance to visit them in real life, she realized that there was something wrong, that something wasn't working. People weren't, out on the street, weren't enjoying these public spaces. They were kind of dead somehow. And so that led her to try and figure out what exactly makes city streets work.
Okay, thanks for that table setter, as it were. Let's go to the chief planner. I want to find out off the top, how much of Jane Jacobs and her theories and her mission informs what you do right now?
Well, I would say that, I'm a student of Jane Jacobs. The very first planning book I read, if you can even call it a planning book, was Death and Life of Great American Cities. And that was the moment when I kind of said, aha, there's something actually very rich and dynamic about the way she was thinking about and talking about cities. And it's really important to note that it's not something that's static. It's, people always say, oh, if we applied her ideas here, well, her ideas are actually, they're very dynamic. They're a set of principles that can manifest in a whole variety of different ways. So I would say that the culture of the city planning department, the principles that we bring to our everyday practice are entirely rooted in the thinking and the training that both myself and subsequent chief planners in the City of Toronto, who were in fact very good friends of Jane Jacob, have had. So her legacy is, you know, it's deep and it's broad, and it touches a whole variety of facets about how we think about urban and city life in the City of Toronto.
Peter, let me get your take on that. Do you think Jane Jacobs was right about how cities ought to be planned?
Well, that's a complicated question. I think she was half right, but I think part of the problem with Jane Jacobs is that she was overly focused on aesthetics, on things like small streets and varied sizes of buildings, and that's all well and good. And you know, I grew up 2 blocks away from where Jane Jacobs wrote Death and Life, right on Hudson Street, and you know, it is a beautiful neighborhood to grow up in. But when you focus solely on these kind of aesthetic factors that make up a neighborhood, you miss the economic component. And I think that was a big failing of Jane Jacobs. And so when you look at the West Village now, where Jane Jacobs wrote that book and what she used as an example of the kind of perfect American neighborhood, only millionaires and billionaires can really afford to live there. So without that economic critique, Jane Jacobs' kind of thinking is very limited, in my opinion.
Just flesh that out a little bit for us, Peter, because when you say she's half right, obviously you think she's half wrong about something. What's the economic component that you think she missed?
Well, I think Death and Life kind of ignores the need to protect cities from gentrification, essentially what we now call gentrification, and what Jane Jacobs might have called success. I mean, she was the one that said that the greatest threat to a neighborhood is its own success. So when a neighborhood does well because it has those aesthetic features, those varied buildings, those small streets, those trees, those parks, when it does well, when that attracts people, what that ends up doing is privileging those who can afford to move into that neighborhood and who appreciate those features of a neighborhood. So without protections for the poor, without things like rent control or rent regulation, you're really inevitably going to have the nice neighborhoods, the Jacobs favored neighborhoods, become the rich neighborhoods.
Would you agree, Jennifer, that Jane Jacobs may have missed the bus on this one?
Well, Jane has such an incredible body of work that I think it's really important to look at that entire body of work and understand her thinking through that body of work, because she wrote a lot about the economies of cities and the complexity of the economies of cities, and in fact was one of the early thinkers to actually recognize cities as having their own economy as opposed to being a subset of a larger economic context. But she also inherently advocated for diversity. I think that's something that's often in some ways misunderstood or misinterpreted. The granularity that comes with making a great place is connected to a whole variety of different types of diversity, both in terms of how people move, but also in terms of housing typologies, also in terms of different tenures, and really...
And incomes too, I presume? And
incomes, of course. So the best manifestation, I think, of Jane Jacobs' thinking, the absolute best example that we have in the Toronto context is, in fact, St. Lawrence neighborhood, which, of course, has also stood the test of time. You know, 45 years later, it's an area that is not gentrified. It was built to lift people out of poverty, and guess what? It's done exactly that. It was also built to be a dynamic, walkable place that had a strong sense of community, an integration of uses, and an integration of a whole variety of people from different socioeconomic strata. So if we see that as a manifestation of those ideas, I think it's a pretty good counterpoint to the argument that she forgot a big piece. There are not many places, I think, in the world that you can actually say have done such a good job at getting all of the critical pieces, the mix right to deliver a community where people can thrive. And St. Lawrence neighborhood right here in the City of Toronto is a great example of that. At the same time, the two kings, King Parliament and King Spadina, are areas where Jane's ideas were applied, taking away the zoning restrictions, allowing for the market economy to really drive revitalization. And those are areas where we need public policy now to come in and put the brakes on what's happening precisely because of the success of those ideas. So the importance of having a regulatory role and using it in a very nuanced way at different times in the life and the evolution of the fabric of the city, I think is a really important idea. There's times when you need to get out of the way. There's times when there's interventions that are needed. And I think throughout the body of the work, her work, she describes that and alludes to that again and again.
Gotcha. Let's do an excerpt here referring to Peter's old neck of the woods. This is Greenwich Village today. This is from Lev Bratyshenko, writing for the Literary Review of Canada. Yet for all that, the village, the neighborhood she loved so fiercely and immortalized in Death and Life, has died. It was not leveled by the planners, it was slowly strangled by the invisible hand. Of course, it does not look dead. If anything, it looks recently repainted. But the vitality, he writes, is gone. Its rich new residents have closed in on themselves, and more businesses serve tourists than locals. Peter, you think that's fair criticism?
I do. Just to give you a little bit of personal backstory from growing up there, when I grew up in the West Village, it kind of still was that Jacobean paradise where, you know, kids could play in the street and walk to school by themselves because there were eyes on the street watching them, just as Jacobs had said there were. Now there are hardly any restaurants that I can afford. My parents, who still live there, are surrounded by private security contractors and investment bankers. The cheapest slice of pizza, which, as I'm sure you know, is a New York staple, is approximately $3.50 as opposed to $1.25. It's an area that's actively hostile to low-income residents. And gay pride, which used to be a huge deal in the West Village, the building my parents still live in hired private security last year for the first time to prevent, I guess, what they saw as a threat from gay pride. So that just gives you a little bit of an example of the kind of people who have moved into this Jacobean paradise. And I think that's exactly right. It's a dead neighborhood. There's nothing that can be garnered from living there, from exploring its streets, except for, you know, shopping.
Nathan, what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's absolutely right in a sense, but she also did actually kind of recognize that this was a severe problem that cities have as a built-in aspect of their economies. She called it the self-destruction of diversity. And so I think it's not exactly synonymous with gentrification in the sense that I think she saw minor gentrification as in the moving in of people both, you know, of higher incomes or higher education levels at a small scale as something that's okay as long as they integrate into the existing community and don't radically disrupt it, which is exactly what we see today. But as that process continues on, it becomes increasingly homogenous and doesn't allow any kind of diversity to exist, both in terms of incomes, but also in terms of different kinds of uses and the sort of creative economies that cities can produce at their best.
I know it's somewhat sacrilegious to criticize Jane Jacobs in some circles, but I want to go back to Lev's piece in the LRC because he does. And let's hear some more of this. Board 3, please, Sheldon. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things you do not see, especially if you are a middle-aged, middle-class, white lady in 1950s New York. What you see depends on who you are, and many of Jacobs's appealing dictums seem much less universal once you consider race, class, ethnicity, or other less visible relationships of power. Tweak to those and step outside Jacobs' crackling narrative, and suddenly all you can see is what she leaves out. It is unpleasant, but it is necessary, for whoever today invokes her blindly invokes also her blindness. Middle-class white lady. This is kind of a tough shot, Jennifer. Is there something to this criticism as well?
Well, I think there is something to the criticism, and I think it's important to also historically locate Jacobs in her time. I think that's only a fair thing to do. But I also think I actually think it's unduly harsh, in part because the fundamental premise of her thinking was about ideas and creativity and planning emerging from the grassroots up, which inherently is not about the white middle-class woman telling communities how they should be, but actually putting systems and processes in place to allow communities to have self-determination. And this is the reason why you can't really point at a community and say, that's a Jane Jacobs community, because the reality is there's lots of different ways that communities are going to evolve and change, and as a result, embody those principles that that she in fact talked about in her work. In the City of Toronto right now, we have implemented a design review panel, a planning review panel, and we sent out a civic lottery to get residents from across the entire city to actually advise the planning department on how we go about our recommending planning policy to City Council. And we did that for a very simple reason. It's because we're conscious that as planners, we don't live in every corner of the experience. We don't represent every experience and demographic in the city. So we have this rich panel of 28 people who are every color of the rainbow, who have every kind of history you can imagine.
When you say rich, you don't mean money.
And
you mean...
Well, actually, they are representative of the socioeconomic demographic in the city. They are representative of tenants and owners. They have every kind of diverse component within them, this group.
So rich meaning all the bases
So
covered.
rich meaning that we get every kind of perspective that you could imagine. And what's so important about, and you've got old, you've got young, you've got able-bodied, you've got people who are not able-bodied, all participating and giving their perspectives. And to me, Jane Jacobs never talked about having a planning review panel, but to me, the fact that we've done that and we're implementing it and we're using this diversity of perspectives to give us another window into how we design planning policy is actually fundamentally Jacobian, because it goes back to this notion that you need a whole diversity of perspectives. And remember, she was reacting in her engagement, her reluctant activism actually came in response to exactly the opposite. One white guy basically taking a map and going whoosh, and wiping the slate clean and saying, there's nothing valuable about this neighborhood.
This is Robert Moses?
This is Robert Moses, right? I'm gonna get out the bulldozers and flatten this neighborhood because all those little shops with all those little ethnic stores, ew, let's get rid of them. They're not very nice in the city. Let's have, big, large, sweeping spaces. Let's get rid of that nuance. Let's get rid of that character. And the key really principle from Jane Jacobs' thinking is to actually say, well, wait a minute. If we observe the dynamic of what makes a rich community, rich in the broadest sense, not a monetary sense, and what makes a dynamic place where people thrive and where they belong and where there's a relationship between people, then we're actually going to plan differently. We're going to recognize that allowing and putting the parameters in place such that people can flourish is in fact going to create really great places. And I agree, the example given in New York that has really become sterilized, just because Jane Jacobs lived there, I don't think if you were to give that example to Jane today, in keeping with Nathan's comment, she would say, well, yeah, that's exactly what I talked about. I talked about the self-destruction of diversity, and that's exactly what's happened in that context. And it's exactly why we need public policy so that that doesn't happen, because the free hand of the market will mean that you will, in fact, inevitably sterilize and repaint everyone out of a neighborhood.
Well, having said that, Peter, let me go to you on this. Was Jacobs naive in thinking that upper-class whites would want to live with, say, lower-income blacks in the same neighborhood in New York?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to answer that question. If I would just like to clarify, first of all, that I'm not a fan of Robert Moses, and I don't think most people who work in planning these days are. I would, if I had to pick a camp, I'd pick Jacobs for sure. But I do think, again, this isn't about her being wrong. It's about her only kind of understanding half the story, and not even that, but how we interpret her thinking in the modern age. We only remember the parts about the cute streets and the trees and the small and diverse shops. We don't remember the economic critique she gave in her later books. We don't remember that in 2004 she wrote a book called Dark Times Ahead, where she said if we don't solve economic inequality through massive social programs, that we're going to end up with cities that are uninhabitable for many people and protests in the streets and many of the things we're seeing now in the United States. So, and that's obviously not Jacobs' fault, but I think it is a fault of how urban planners and cities especially remember her, because it's much easier to plant a tree than it is to provide economic equality for your residents. And without that economic equality, the point of her book is kind of moot, in my opinion.
Sure, but Nathan, let me try this with you. And I mean, you can do all the social engineering and all the planning you want to do, but one wonders at the end of the day if it's not human nature for people to sort of strive to live in the best possible neighborhood. You can define best however you want. The best possible neighborhood with people, frankly, who are just like them. I mean, that's human nature, isn't it?
Well, I think that's a really complicated question and not something that Jacobs did a good job of necessarily unpacking. But what I will say is that, one of the things that does get left out, to Peter's point, is her support of public housing, actually. And she has an entire chapter near the end of Death and Life that it seems like no one ever got to. They just read the first half, where she talks about, how you could reform public housing and the need for it in cities. And really, the big thing that she got at was that it shouldn't be a concentration of massive amounts of poverty that's sort of an island within the city. It should be everywhere. It should be integrated into every neighborhood in ways that are kind of, don't seem out of place. Right? And Toronto's actually has a great history of that.
Well, and that's a really good example of how that idea is something that we just take for granted now across all of Canada, that social housing shouldn't be clustered, right, but in fact it should be dispersed, and that every neighborhood, if it's a complete community, has a diversity of housing types, a diversity of housing tenures, meaning you can rent, you can own, and that we ought to, in order to create really livable communities, have fully integrated communities, and that you need public policy like inclusionary zoning in order to deliver on that. That's an example of a really powerful idea. I wouldn't say that people kind of read it and forgot about it. We read it, we bought into it, and we're doing it from Vancouver to Montreal to Toronto. We're just doing it. We're like, yep, we're not doing it that old way that was done in the 50s and 60s. It's sort of become common knowledge that that's a better model.
I think it's different in the States, though, and I think
Maybe.
people remember her very differently depending on where you are. I mean, in Canada, she's still thought of very much as a kind of contemporary figure who died very recently, was writing books right up to her death, and we still talk about some of the things she wrote. But in the States, she's still very much, I mean, maybe Peter can speak better to this, but I think she's still thought of very much as a character of the 60s. And Death and Life was sort of the key work. People remember sort of her as a preservationist and an activist, but I think that she, as we've been talking about, she's a much more rich thinker who has all sorts of things to say about all sorts of matters.
Peter, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people in the United States still think of her as a relevant figure, but we have a lot of problems here, as I'm sure you know, and you do in Canada as well. But when we're destroying tens of thousands of public housing units over the last decade, which we've done, and that came out of the idea that public housing should be quote unquote integrated. Instead, what cities did is they demolished all of their public housing projects and then didn't rebuild them. And when you have massive income inequality, Jacobs' ideas don't seem relevant because it seems like there are more important things to focus on. And that's, when I wrote this piece for Slate a couple of months ago that said kind of like time to forget about Jane Jacobs, it's not that she's not relevant. It's that we need to address so many other things in cities that are really plaguing American cities, and just focusing on her aesthetic values allows us to ignore those other things.
Gotcha. Nate?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And I think one of the things, again, that gets overlooked in her work is her thoughts on social mobility, and particularly the role of place in fostering social mobility. The neighborhood that she was talking about at that time, and maybe we can't make those places quite the same anymore, but there was a strong sense of social capital within the community there, partly because of the stability of the neighborhood. And that allowed people who got ahead through social mobility, because they essentially, as they say, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, were able to kind of connect with the other people in the neighborhood and help them when they need it. But when you have this sort of dynamic of hypergentrification, it totally wipes out that sense of social capital and stability in neighborhoods.
Down to our last couple of minutes here. Jennifer, let me try this with you. Jane Jacobs clearly was a hero to a lot of people, particularly when she led the successful fight to stop the Spadina Expressway. The other side of that was that she may have ushered in an era where people came to the conclusion that you really can't get anything built in the city anymore because some group is going to protest against it, or the environmental assessment's going to go on for 30 years. So, in effect, you can't get anything done. Does she have to carry the can on that one?
Well, I think it comes back to a fundamental question. Would you rather do something destructive or nothing at all? And I think my answer is, I've visited many cities and worked in many cities that didn't go through that period. And as a result, they were kind of saved, quite frankly, because that era never happened. They didn't embrace building expressways. And as a result, the heritage buildings, the key infrastructure, beautiful neighborhoods were actually saved. So, it's a kind of a funny question. At the end of the day, do you want to build something bad, or is it better to build nothing at all? And I would argue, well, it's better to be static. It's important to note in the GTA, we have not been static. We've been building gangbusters. So the idea that we have somehow stopped, I think it's simply not accurate. On the flip side, I do think that for a variety of reasons, we have gone through an era where we've actually been afraid of large infrastructure projects. Now, the largest infrastructure project in history is being built right outside these doors, Eglinton Crosstown, 22 kilometers of LRT.
Oh, that's what, $6 billion?
It's $6 billion, and it's being built right now, and then we're halfway through the process. So I think we're starting to get our heads around. The mayor announced tolls for building transit and other key infrastructure that we're starting to get our heads around. And the title of his presentation today was Time to Build. So I do think that we're building public confidence. We have better processes and systems that we've had in our public processes that we've had in the past that will build confidence. But I think from my perspective, it's better to build nothing at all than to build something that's inherently destructive.
Last 30 seconds to you then, Nate. It's a bit precious to wonder what Jane would say today if she were alive, but let's do it anyway. There are a lot of tall buildings going up in the capital city of Ontario these days. What would she make of that?
That's a tricky question because she was kind of agnostic about tall buildings. I think that the impression is that she would have loved everything to be really low-lying and all that sort of stuff. But I actually think that really it had more to do with the devil's in the details, right? Does it still allow sun into the street? Sure, there's that aesthetic side of it. But also, what are you getting rid of when you build those buildings? Right? What is actually wiped away? Are the small businesses that are displaced, do they actually relocate, or are they gone forever? And I don't think that we've necessarily, and maybe Jennifer can speak to this, but...
No, she can't, because we're out of time.
Sure.
That's it, everybody. So glad you all came in tonight for this. Peter Moskowitz, it's nice of you to join us on the line from Calico, New York. Population 200, right in the middle of nowhere. His latest is called How to Kill a City. Jennifer Kiesmetz, the chief planner for the City of Toronto. Nathan Storing, co-editor of Vital Little Plans, the short works of Jane Jacobs. Thanks, everybody.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.